Hello everyone, welcome to the session 8 in the Java series for Selenium. In this session we are going to talk about the arrays concept in the Java. So we will be talking about the different types of arrays, how we can declare it, how we can initialize and access the values from this array in the Java programming. So let's start our discussion with the question, why do we require arrays in the Java? So in this program I am storing 10 different integer values using 10 different variables. Okay, so disadvantage with this approach is I need to create separate variable for storing each integer value. So in case I want to store more values, I need to create separate variables for storing those values. Okay, in case I want to store 100 values, then I will have to create 100 separate variables. So major disadvantage with this approach for storing the values is you need to create separate variables for storing each value. Okay, so it will increase your code size, it will increase the maintenance as well. It will be hard to manage, update the values for these variables, and in case you need to scale the variables, you need to create again separate variables, and it will be difficult to perform the operations as well because you cannot remember all these variable names practically. So solution to this problem is array concept in the Java. So using the array, we can store multiple values of same data type using a single variable. And all these variable values will be stored in a continuous memory location. So you can directly access the values using the indexes. You don't need to create separate variable for storing these values. You will create only a single variable, and using that variable reference, you will be creating an object which will refer to an object containing multiple values of same data type. So if you see in the previous session we have seen about the different data types. So array comes from the non-primitive data types. Okay, so arrays in Java itself is a object. So arrays will always be a non-primitive data type in the Java. So even though it is a non-primitive data type, in that array object we can store primitive values or non-primitive values as well. Okay, so there is no limitation what kind of values you are storing in the array object. So only condition is you need to store elements of same data type. So most commonly types of arrays, one-dimensional and two-dimensional array. So in the one-dimensional array we will have only a single row in which we can store multiple values of same data type. And in case of two-dimensional array, it will be like a tabular structure containing rows and cell. Okay, so whenever you want to store some data in a form of tabular format, you will use the two-dimensional array. Okay, so both the one-dimensional and two-dimensional array has the importance and usage in the automation testing as well. So now coming to the one-dimensional array declaration. So there are two ways by which we can declare the one-dimensional array. So this is the first syntax. You need to provide the data type, like what kind of element you are going to store in that array object. So that is the data type of the element. Then you will have to provide the square bracket and give some variable name. So this will be your object reference or array name. Okay, so this will act as a variable. So you need to create only a single variable. Then syntax 2, data type. Then you will have the array name, that is variable name, and then you can provide the square bracket. Okay, so both the syntax are valid in the Java programming. So you can use any one of it. Now coming to the array initialization. So here we have just declared the array, but now we have to initialize the array, and after initialization only object will be created in the memory. That means memory will be allocated for that array object. So there are two ways by which we can perform the initialization. So this is the method one. Here we can use the new keyword in the Java. Okay, so we have already seen we can use new keyword to create object of any class. Okay, so for array also we can use this new keyword to create the array object. Okay, so with this syntax one, integer square bracket student marks is equals to new integer 5. So in the bracket we are providing how many elements I want to store in that array object. Okay, so this statement will create array of integer type, and that array will have size equals to 5. Okay, so this statement will create array of size 5 with the default values. Now this default value will be depend upon what kind of element or what kind of values you are storing in that array. So this is the array of integer type. So for all the integer values, default value will be 0. Okay, so when we run this statement, it will create array object of size 5 with default value is equals to 0 for every element. Then method 2. So in this method, we can directly declare and initialize the array in a single statement. Okay, like a string literal. So here we have providing integer array student marks is equals to curly bracket, and inside the curly bracket you can provide what element you want to store in that object separated by the comma. Okay, so when you already know what kind of values or what values you want to store in the array object, you can use this method. Okay, so give the integer, like what kind of data you want to store, square bracket, variable name is equals to curly bracket, and directly insert the values. So this statement will also create a array object, and this statement will also create the array object. Okay, so only difference is here we are creating the object and we are initializing the values as well. Okay, so in the memory it will create a object, and that object will contain all these values. Okay, and that object will be referenced by using this variable student marks. So this student marks is nothing but a object reference or a variable. So with this first statement it will also create a array object in the memory, but all the elements in that array will be 0. So if you create array using new keyword, Java automatically assign default values. Okay, so here if you create integer type of array or float or double, it will be 0. Okay, so all elements will be initialized to the 0 or 0.0 in case of float and double. In case you created array of boolean type, the default value will be false, and in case you created array of string type, so all the values will be null. So how these values are stored in the array object? Okay, so array works on the index. Array starting index is 0. Okay, so whatever element you are storing at the first location, the index of that element will be 0. As our starting index is 0 in the array, what will be the last element indexed? Last element index. So that will be size of array minus 1. Right? As you are starting with the 0, last element index will be size of array minus 1. So in case here we are storing 5 values, so 70 will have 0 index, and this 75 will have index is equals to 4. That means 5 minus 1, that is equals to 4. Okay, so we have declared the array, we have initialized the array also, that means we have stored the values also, but how we can access and update the values from this array now? Okay, so let's see that. So first let's see how we can access the elements from this array. Okay, so for accessing, as I said, we need to use the index. For example, let's try to print value of first element. So I need to use this array variable reference. Okay, this is the object reference, square bracket, and you need to provide the index of the element which you want to access. For example, I want to get the value of this first element. So this first value is stored at the 0th index. So I will give 0 here. Okay, so this will give me 70. Then again, I want to get the value stored at the third location. Okay, this third element. So this third element will have index is equals to 2. Right, 0, 1 and 2. So here I need to provide 2. So like this you can access the elements from this array by using the index. Okay, and same way we can update the values as well. So in case I want to update value, okay, last index value equals to 80. So again I will have to use this variable square bracket. So last is at the 4th. So this is the 4th index is equals to, let's say, 80. So if we print the value at the 4th index, this time we should get 80. Okay, so this is how we can access and modify the array elements by using the index. So now let's see how we can perform looping through the arrays. Okay, so looping through this array, that means I want to loop for every element from this array object. Okay, for example, I want to print each and every value from this array. So here we can use the for loop. Okay, simple for loop or enhanced for loop. So we have already seen about the simple for loop. Enhanced for loop we will discuss in this session using enhanced for loop. So we have already seen about the simple for loop. So inside the round bracket I will start integer I is equals to 0. Okay, so we are going to access each and every element from this array object. Okay, so our first element or first value is stored at the 0th index. So I will start my variable I is equals to 0. Then I need to provide some condition. So I want to iterate each and every element from this array object. Okay, so from starting to ending. So I need to get the size of this array first. Okay, so how many elements are available in that array? So that value can be dynamic for your array. Okay, so instead of hard coding, we have one property called length in case of array. Okay, so I can directly use this student marks, okay, object reference dot, we have this length property. Okay, so length is a property, or you can say the variable. It is not a method because it do not have this round bracket. Okay, so in case of array, you need to remember length is a property or a variable in the array object. Okay, so in case of this object, you will get 5. So we will start with the 0th index, and I should be less than array size. Okay, so in case you are using less than equals to, you need to minus 1 from here. Okay, so instead of that, I will directly use I less than student marks dot length, semicolon, and then we need to increment the value of I. So inside the for loop, as per your requirement, you can perform different operations on this array object elements. Okay, so for now we are going to print the values. So system.out.println, let's say array element at index, what index? The current value of I. So that also I can use is, and we'll print. How we can access? We have already seen, right? So here we need to concat properly. This is students. Okay, so this is how we are going to print each and every value from the array object. Same we can do using the enhanced for loop. So this is quite simple. For inside the bracket, you need to provide what kind of element you have stored inside this array. So I know I have stored integer values. So that I will give here. So give me integer value, let's say any number, or I will give, let's say, marks. So for every integer type of marks, colon, from this array. Okay, this is how you can read it. So in case of enhanced for loop, we don't need to provide any counter variables or increment or decrement. We are simply saying for every integer type of marks from this student's marks array. So we will directly print the values of the marks. Okay, so this is all about the single dimensional array. How we can declare it, how we can initialize it, how we can access and update the values, and how we can perform the looping through the single dimensional array using simple for loop and using enhanced for loop. Okay, so before going to the two-dimensional array, let's run this program. Okay, so before looping through the arrays, here we have printed value at 0th index, right? So here we got the 70. Then we are printing the value at the second index, that means 0, 1, 2. We should get 90. This is correct. And then we have updated the value of 4th index value to 80. That means last element should be 80 now instead of 75. So that is also working fine. So access and update. And using the loops, using the simple for loop, we got every element as per the index 70, 85, 90, 60 and 80. And using the enhanced for loop also, we got all the values from that array object. So here we have stored the primitive data type inside this array object. Okay, and as I said, we can create or we can store the non-primitive values also inside this array. Okay, so let me show you one example here. Let's say I am going to store string type of values inside my array object. Okay, so as per the syntax, what I will have to provide? I will have to provide the data type. It is string square bracket, let's say array 1 is equals to, and I will create curly bracket, and every element inside this object will be of string type, right? So that I need to provide inside the double quote separated by comma, like this. Okay, so this array 1 is a array object containing string type of value, that means non-primitive data type values. So now let's talk about two-dimensional array. So this two-dimensional array is array of one-dimensional array, right? So sometimes one dimensional array we cannot use for storing data in a form of tabular format. Okay, so whenever you want to store data in a tabular format, that means containing a row and some columns. Okay, so in form of, let's say, matrix. So in that case we can use this two-dimensional array. So let's see how we can declare and initialize this two-dimensional array. So let's say I am going to create two-dimensional array of integer type. So again I will provide the data type first. Then I need to provide two square bracket. As it is a two-dimensional array, we need to provide two square bracket. Then variable name, let's say matrix, is equals to, inside the curly bracket only I need to store the values. So this curly bracket is for the array, but we are going to create array of one-dimensional array. Okay, so for single array we have one curly bracket, and again for this one-dimensional array, again I will have to store values inside the curly bracket. So each value inside this two-dimensional array is a one-dimensional array. So separated by the comma. Right? So every element in this two-dimensional array is a one-dimensional array itself. And we can perform the initialization in the same way how we perform for the one-dimensional array. So just add the values separated by the comma. Okay, so here we have performed declaration and initialization in the same line. Same how we do in the one-dimensional array here in the second method. But we can use method 1 or method 1 approach to declare the two-dimensional array as well. So here we need to specify the array size. So let's see how we can do it. So here again I will use integer, square bracket, okay, two square bracket. Let's say matrix 2 is equals to, here we need to use the new keyword, right? New, then again data type, two square bracket, semicolon, and inside this square bracket I need to specify how many rows and how many cells you want inside this matrix 2 array object. Okay, so as it is a two-dimensional array, it will contain row and columns. So first square bracket denotes the row, like how many rows you want inside that array object. So let's say I want to create matrix of 3 by 3. So first 3 rows, and every row should contain 3 columns or 3 cells. Okay, so this statement will create two-dimensional array of integer type with 3 row and 3 columns. So if you want to find the size of this two-dimensional array, you just need to multiply row into column, right? So 3 row and 3 columns. So this will give you 3 into 3 is equals to 9. So total 9 elements are stored inside this two-dimensional array. Okay, so this is just a declaration. So again, this array elements will be initialized to their default value depending upon the type of array. So here we have declared and initialized the two-dimensional array. Here we have just declared it. Now how we can store the values? So you will use the object reference variable name matrix 2. Then I will have to provide the two square bracket equals to whatever value you want to store. Now this value where you want to store. So 0, 0. So my first value will be available at the 0th row and 0th column, right? So for every row and every column, our index will start from the 0. Then let's say I want to store second element now. So 0th row and first column. So similarly, we will have the last element in the first row. So that will have second index. So our row will remain 0. This is our first row with index equal to 0, and our column value changing from 0 to 2. So with this approach, what will be the index or what will be the location of the last element inside this two-dimensional array? So our last element will be having last row number, that means 2, and it will have last cell number also, that is also 2. So matrix 2 by 2 is equals to, let's say, 100. So this will be our last element inside this two-dimensional array. So now looping through the two-dimensional array. So here I will have to use two for loops, right? One for loop for the row and another for loop for the cell. So this will be our outer for loop, and inside for loop I will use another for loop for the column. Okay, so we have already seen about the nesting of the loops. So that concept will be useful when you want to looping through the two-dimensional array. So this outer for loop for the row, and inside this outer for loop another for loop for iterating through the columns from that row. Outer for loop, let's say I am starting integer j is equals to 0. Then I will have to provide the condition for the j. So j should be less than the length of the array. Okay, so in case of this two-dimensional array, the length of this array is the 3 because it contains 3 rows. Okay, and for every row, the column values can be different. Okay, so I want to iterate through each row using this outer for loop. So that value I can get using matrix 2 dot length property. So j plus plus. Okay, so this is for iterating through each row from the two-dimensional array. And from each row, I want to iterate for every cell. So again, we will have to create another integer k. Will start from the 0th index, right? And k value should be less than equals to array size of the one-dimensional array. Okay, so every element from this two-dimensional array is a one-dimensional array. So I will have to find how many elements are available in that row. Okay, so it can be 3, it can be 2, it can be 4 depending upon how you created the two-dimensional array. Okay, so value of this cell or value of the column should go up to the matrix 2 and whatever row you are iterating. So current iteration, let's say j. So jth row dot length. So for that particular row, how many elements are available in that row? So that elements I want to iterate. So that's why we need to use k should be less than equal to matrix 2 of j. So this will give the current row, and from that row, how many elements are there? Give me the length. Okay, semicolon k plus plus. Okay, so outer for loop will iterate through each row, and this inner for loop will iterate each element from that row. Okay, and now we can print the value. So matrix 2 square bracket value of j comma value of k. Okay, so outer for loop will executed 3 times, and in total inner for loop will be executed 9 times. So let's try to print all the values from this matrix 2 array. Okay, so these values you will get whatever we have assigned, and for the index for which we have not assigned any value, we will get the 0 as it is a integer type. Okay, so for after every print, I am going to print a new line. Okay, and here we will print every value from that row in same line. So I have removed ln here. So system.out.print, it will print all the cell values from that particular row. So for the first row, we will get whatever values we have stored, 89, 95 and 95. Then for the second row, we have not initialized any values. So there we will get the 0 for every cell. And our last element will be 100. So first and second element inside the second row will be 0. So if you see here, this is our first value, 89, 95 and 95. Second row contains no values because we have not initialized any values for those indexes for the second row and all the cells. So it will take the default value for the integer data type. That's why we got 0, 0, 0. And for the last row, we have initialized only the last element inside that row. So first two elements will be 0 and last element will be 100. Okay, to see this properly, I can give some space over here after each value. Okay, like this. Let's run it again. Okay, now it looks better. Okay, so this is how you can perform looping through the two-dimensional array using two for loops. Outer for loop for the row and inner for loop for the cell. So if you see here, we have created array with two-dimensional array, and each row contains equal number of columns. Okay, so every column contains 3 values, right? So there is another types called as a jagged array. So this jagged array contains rows with different columns. Okay, so we can create jagged array, which is again a two-dimensional array, and inside that two-dimensional array, every row can contain different number of columns. Okay, for example, let's say first row contains 3 values or 3 columns. Then I can have second row which contains only 2 values or 2 columns, and I can have third row which will only have 1 column, okay, only 1 value. So let's create the jagged array for this requirement. Okay, so again it is going to be a 2-dimensional array. So I am going to use integer values, 2 square bracket for 2-dimensional array. Jagged array, this is my variable name or object reference, equals to first curly bracket as it is a 2-dimensional array, and every element is again a 1-dimensional array. So I am going to create 3 rows. Okay, so as per our requirement, first row contains 3 columns. So this is our first row, 1, 2, 3. For the second row, it should contain only 2 values. And in the last row, I will have only 1 value or 1 column. So this is how we can create and initialize the jagged array in the Java. So every row contains different number of columns. Okay, and using this 2 for loop, again we can print the elements from the jagged array. Okay, so you can see here we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So for all these 1-dimensional, 2-dimensional or jagged array, when we are trying to access the value at the index which is not present in that array object, then we will get array index out of bounds exception. For example, in the single dimensional array, our last element index is 4 because size of array is 5. So if we try to access the value at index 5 or more than 5, in this case you will get the array index out of bounds exception. So in case of the simple for loop, if we are trying to iterate through this single dimensional array, I need to use this condition properly. Okay, if I am adding here less than or equal to, then again in this condition at the last iteration I will get the error because we are iterating starting with the 0 and we are going up to the 5th index, and 5th index is not available in this array. Again you will get the same exception. Okay, so at the line number 67 we are getting that exception here. Okay, so make sure you are using this condition correctly. So that's all for this session, guys, where we have seen the importance of the arrays in the Java. Why do we require it? We have seen about the different types of the arrays, 1-dimensional, 2-dimensional and jagged array. We have seen how we can declare and initialize it using different methods, and we have covered how we can iterate through this 1-dimensional and 2-dimensional array using the for loops.